Welcome back to Streaming Media Connect 2025. I'm Steve Nathans Kelly, editor of Streaming Media and chair of Streaming Media Connect, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our penultimate session, Teams of Rivals. Will bundles and indirect sales save subscription-based streaming? Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes that will be familiar to all of you who've been here all week. We are giving away a $50 Amazon gift card at the end of the session to the first person to correctly identify the track and the artist that we just heard. And you must be present to win. And so the chat is open. Feel free to chat in the chat and save your questions for the panel for the Q&A box. I'll put them in there so they don't scroll away. And sessions from all 3 days of Streaming Media Connect are already appearing on the Streaming Media YouTube channel. Link is in the chat. And we will be back live and in person in Santa Monica, California, October 6th to 8th for Streaming Media 2025. And with our fabulous new chair, Andy Beach, the program is now online. The link for that is also in the chat, and registration is open. The call for speakers is also open. So if you look at the program, and you have an area of expertise, something you'd like to talk about, drop us a line through the call for speakers and try to find a spot for you in the program. And that's about it for the housekeeping notes. So I would like to welcome the one and only Alan Wolk of TVREV. Welcome, Alan. Good to see you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve. Great to be here yet again. Who doesn't love a good penultimate panel, right? Anyway, I'm going to introduce my panelists here. I'm going to call them on. So first off is Anastasia. And if you can just sort of give us your name, what you do, and a little bit about why these people should care what you have to say.
Great. Thanks, Alan. Hi, everyone. I'm Anastasia Pronin. I'm a director of partner growth at Roku. My team works with content partners who are distributing their streaming service on the Roku platform, whether that's through an app or through the Roku channel premium subscriptions, which is effectively our channels model. And we really work with those partners to really help them to scale and to grow on the platform. So definitely a lot of conversations about bundles these days as we talk about overall growth. So great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. And next up, we have Adam. Adam, come on board.
Hi, everyone. I'm Adam Salmons. I'm the head of content acquisition and business development for Philo. So my team oversees all of the content that comes into Philo, including any type of bundling decisions we'd be making, as well as getting our app out on platforms and working with people like Anastasia.
Okay. And for people who may not know what Philo is, what can you...
Sure. We're virtual MVPD. We concentrate on, I would say, entertainment, lifestyle, reality programming. So we've got a great set of channels that come from Paramount, AMC, A&E, Warner Brothers Discovery, Hallmark, and a number of others, all at a really great value. $28, and relevant to this discussion today also includes access to AMC Plus.
Excellent. Excellent. And now we've got the three A's up on the board. We're going to do a B. Brendan.
Awesome. Thanks, Alan. Hi, everyone. I'm Brendan Brady. I lead strategy for Antenna. Antenna is a Series A startup. We've been around for just about 5 years. We have purchase data on a panel of about 2 million Americans. And so we look at what do they pay for streaming-wise, as well as other discretionary spend categories. We repackage up that information, sell it back to services, distributors, investors, you name it. And so I've poured over a lot of third-party streaming purchase data around how the consumer behaves, and having that kind of 360-degree view of both a consumer within Netflix and outside of Netflix, I think is really ripe information for any sort of bundling conversation.
Okay, and I am Alan Wolk. I am the co-founder and lead analyst at TVREV. We are, as the name implies, an analyst firm. We cover the intersection of streaming and advertising and everything that has to do with it. We've got, at this point, 5 newsletters every week covering everything from European TV to local TV. We have a website, and we are quite active on LinkedIn, so find us in one of those places. So I'm going to actually start off with you, Brendan. So for you, there's a guy named Rich Greenfield, who many of you know. He's a pretty well-known Wall Street analyst. And for years, Rich used to sign off all of his tweets with the hashtag good luck bundle. And he did not mean that in a good way. What was the problem with old school bundles? Like, why didn't people like them?
Well, look, I think it's a great question. Rich is definitely known for that hashtag. The Lightshed Ventures team is behind Antenna as well. So we obviously look at a lot of their research. In terms of what was wrong with the old bundle, nothing was wrong for the businesses themselves, right? It was a very nice sort of arrangement economically. I think for the consumer, it probably got a little too bloated, and you were paying for things you didn't necessarily want, while at the same time, increasingly, some of the quote unquote best stuff, especially around scripted entertainment, was living in many cases exclusively over the top. It kind of takes away from the lore of the bundle. As I'm sure many, if not all people on the call still know, the bundle in many cases is still the best way to watch sports. And that's kind of that last sort of foundational element that we've yet to kind of see break.
Gotcha, gotcha. But now, Anastasia, bundles seem to be having sort of a renaissance. Like suddenly people are like, yeah, it's not that bad. We kind of like them. Like what's changed? What's going on now to get people to kind of look at them differently, where it's not a dirty word anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I think we sort of seen the great unbundling, and now we're kind of going back to rebundling. And I think just really looking at kind of where we are in the streaming ecosystem. Many of the major players have pivoted to streaming. They've launched their own service. But over time, I think there was a realization that it's really it's somewhat difficult in some cases to go it alone, right? Or there's been a couple of, I think, things that have sort of happened over the last couple of years. One, just price increases, right? For a consumer to really assemble a streaming package that is holistic, that includes Netflix, it includes an MVPD like Philo, it includes, potentially a few other niche services that, altogether that cost is becoming quite high. And I think overall consumers are becoming quite savvy in terms of cycling through subscriptions, which impacts churn, which is a problem for streamers. And I think just lastly, there's been just a lot of fragmentation. So for the user, it's becoming increasingly complex to navigate the streaming ecosystem. Whereas in the previous cable world, it was a lot simpler, right? You had one package, you turn it on, that was it. So I think in light of all that, I think that's where bundles really come to play. And I think, it's creating a lot of value for the consumer from a pricing perspective, from a simplicity perspective, and it's having some of those churn benefits for the streamers as well.
Gotcha. Adam, you're nodding along. You guys have a business sort of built on that. So talk to you, like what was the thought behind Philo, and where you guys think that people would want that?
For sure. So kind of echo what Brendan was talking about, if we go back to Philo's been in the market now for almost 8 years. And, if you go back to 10 years or so, you had kind of the advent of Sling and those first, what we're now calling virtual MVPDs. And sort of in reaction to the bloat that Brendan was talking about that you had found in a traditional cable or satellite subscription, where people were saying, I watch maybe 5 things, maybe 10 things, and I've got this package of 200 channels. And so I think at the time that, Philo was launching, we looked at the space, and a lot of what was happening with the over-the-top virtuals was, they were going after sports. They were going after the kind of the major 4 broadcast and building packages around that. And the things that were getting left out of those packages at the time were some of the brands that we chose to focus on. So you think about like the Paramount, or at the time Viacom portfolio, AMC, Discovery, really, really great brands that consumers gravitate towards, things like MTV, HGTV, BET, History Channel, Lifetime. And, you had a group of people that really enjoyed what I would say that kind of like entertainment and reality informational type of content that were getting left behind in the packages that were, $100 plus. And really kind of what we saw in the early days was a lot of people had left that ecosystem and were looking for, you know, still a bundle, but a bundle that was more focused on their interest. And I think that's what we've been focused on over my time with Philo, is really like staying true to that audience, adding things to our bundle that we feel enhances the value for the consumer, while still staying true to that kind of main product that is focused on solving the customer need. And that need being, I want entertainment, I don't so much care about sports, and I want to have a package that is right for my wallet.
Right, right. Because I mean, what's interesting about you guys is if you all recall back when virtual MVPDs, industry always comes up with the most trip off the tongue terms for things, VMVPD, was that they were all called skinny bundles, and now they're not. Occasionally you still hear people refer to them at it, but you guys are like you're sort of like the last man standing, if you will, in a business model that I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've kind of had as Anastasia was saying, on multiple fronts, we've sort of seen this like unbundling, rebundling, and now maybe a little bit more focus on, okay, what makes sense? So, to your point, Alan, like, yes, a lot of these things were called skinny bundles, and you had, like I was saying, kind of like you would take the Fox, NBC, ABC, and CBS portfolio and whatever else was owned by those big broadcast companies and put that in a package. And at the time of launch, maybe that was $35 or $40. And then over time, you add to it, and it starts to look like the cable package you used to have, but just watched on your Roku box or your Apple TV device. And the price starts to look similar to what that was. And so I think what we're seeing now is, Philo has kind of stayed true to that. There have been some other people in the space that have had a more slim focus, but you're also seeing DirecTV launch new packages that are focused around sports, around entertainment, around news, because they are also seeing that okay, there is still a demand for a bundled type of service, but people are looking for what is the content that either they can't get elsewhere or that is like the main driver of their interest.
Yeah, thank you. I was hoping someone was going to mention what DirecTV was doing because it fit in so perfect. Now, Anastasia, what are people like as you're putting this together? What do you think are sort of this for consumers? What are some of the main drivers of what they're looking for with bundles? Is it more sort of just more content? Is it better pricing? Sort of a combination? Like where's that? What are you seeing there?
Yeah, I mean, certainly price is important. We talked about how, just the cost of assembling a streaming package outside of cable is becoming increasingly more expensive. Certainly our users, our Roku users, they're very value conscious. They're looking for a great deal. But I would actually kind of pivot in a different direction and talk a little bit more about just simplicity and ease of use in terms of subscription management and aggregation. I think that increasingly is becoming just a pain point for a lot of our users. So I mentioned earlier that we distribute content services on our platform in two different ways. One is through an app. So if you turn on a Roku, you can actually just turn on an app tile and watch the streaming service there. You can watch Philo and many others that way. But we also have a growing number of services distributed through the Roku channel through premium subscriptions. And we really find those users that subscribe there are really looking for that aggregated experience. We provide a unified bill. There's a lot of things that we provide to users to really simplify that streaming journey for them. And we find that actually those users tend to subscribe more. So they actually want to put together a streaming package for themselves. So I think that simplicity and that ease of use, and I think that's backed up by a lot of third-party data as well, is really something that users are looking for increasingly so.
Right. So let's drill into that a little bit. So you guys have the the Roku store, which is a Roku channel, which and then you have a sort of a store within that. So if I subscribe to a bunch of services, it will all show. I have the option to have them all show up in that one interface. Is that correct?
Effectively, yes. I mean, we have a dedicated section for premium subscriptions. We also surface those services throughout our UI and various parts of our platform. We really deeply integrate those services. So yes, effectively, you could call it more of an aggregated experience than you would otherwise get by just subscribing to an app.
Right, right. Now, Brenda, that seems like something that I've been hearing a lot of people want. Like the one thing that's that I constantly hear is I can never find anything. Like everything's all over the place. So when we look at bundling, like, do you think it's more, sort of for the consumer, or is it also a way for the programmers, the services themselves to benefit, or does everybody benefit?
I think it's, not to be too corny, but I really think bundles have the potential to be a win-win. On the consumer side, price, right, and content. You're getting a good deal. Consumers like good deals. On the service or the operator side, what a bundle offers you, in its truest and best form is access to consumers that you might not have had access for. And so there's a great framework around casual fans and super fans and bundles. And basically what the framework spits out is that a productive bundle will maximize casual fan overlap, meaning Brendan Brady is on the fence about Acorn TV and on the fence about Max. If those services came together and offered me a bundled price and that gave me the energy to go get that, that's really positive for the service, and I probably wouldn't have paid rack rate for both each, right? What a bad bundle or a value destructive bundle might do is maximize super fan overlap. For example, say Netflix and Spotify were to come together and offer you a discounted price. Well, Brendan Brady would have been happy to pay full retail rate for Spotify and full retail rate for Netflix. And so they're potentially leaving money on the table. And so I think bundles have the potential to be a win-win, both for the consumer as well as the operator. But in order to kind of realize that opportunity, these bundles have to be crafted, in a thoughtful way that isn't cannibalistic, but rather incremental.
Gotcha. Just want to cut in for a second for the audience. If you have questions, we're going to be having a Q&A. Just remember to stick them in the Q&A. I want to make this as interactive as possible. So write your questions in there. So the other thing, Brendan, I'll stick with you, Brendan, is, with advertising, right? So a lot of the services, we've been talking about this, that, Amazon did this sort of little sleight of hand where they got everybody on ad supported, but everybody else seems to be struggling to get people to sign up for their ad supported services when they have the ad free option and when they're used to subscribing ad free, especially in the US. How much are you seeing people using bundling to try and push people towards the ad supported? In other words, like, we'll give you this great deal on the ad supported, and if you want the ad free, you're on your own.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll hearken to the Disney Warner Brothers bundle, which has been in market for several months. What we see in the data, the decision to go ad supported or ad free on that specific bundle doesn't look all too different than Disney Plus on a standalone basis, or the Disney bundle, the traditional Disney bundle. And so I think there's more to that choice that the consumer makes. And shameless promotion, Antenna just published a big report around how the consumer makes those choices. So feel free to check that out. But what I would say is that we do see the consumer go towards ads. I think there's more than just bundling that goes into that calculus that the consumer does. And I'm sure it varies, by the person's circumstance. Yeah, and so that being said, I think we actually might see more activity on the traditional price front to drive those ad tiers more so than bundling front. And what I mean by that is kind of increasing that spread between the ad-free subscription price and the ad-supported subscription price, to kind of potentially drive people down. Of course, with ads, they have to go watch the service then to actually capture that. And so, I think we might see moves being made to kind of increase that spread and move folks down to get the shot to monetize them in another way.
Yeah, we have been putting forth the same theory that they need to make the spread much bigger, because if you're coming in, especially if you're only going to if you're like, I'm just going to watch this one series, it's another $5. It's like, it's not even a decision.
Right.
But anyway, Anastasia, I noticed you nodding vehemently to a number of the stuff. So what are you seeing on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, I think, we have a pretty ad tolerant audience, but we see some of those same trends mirrored, I think, in terms of what our consumers are doing. I think tying this to maybe the price increases and that delta, I think some of the more recent price increases from some of the major streamers have been targeted more toward the premium tier. So really kind of driving into that ad tier. So very naturally, I think, streamers are trying to segment, and push more toward that tier. I think promotional strategies, right? I think, a few, Disney has leveraged it pretty successfully to really drive into the basic bundle versus the premium tier. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think from an advertising perspective, if you can gain incremental viewers through a bundle, you can gain incremental ad inventory, ideally. And I think, Brendan, you guys have some great data around the Disney Warner bundle, that there is incremental users coming into that bundle that have never subscribed before. So I think all these things are sort of connected in my mind, but I do think it's more of a ad choice preference versus, a bundling conversation when it comes to that.
Gotcha. And Anna, what are you guys seeing in that front, since you are?
Yeah, so yeah, to your point, Alan, we are ad supported. Part of being a bundle that is pretty focused on linear TV, that the ads are right there and built in. So we have less flexibility to offer, an ad-free version of Philo in total. But yeah, I mean, I think what we've seen is we have a set of users that are familiar with linear TV, are familiar with like, if you've got to watch the latest premiering episode of Yellowstone, like that happens on linear TV. And so I think as Anastasia was saying, it's, there are people who are willing to watch ads for specific content. And I think what we see on our platform is there's a lot of focus on the value that we're providing. And I think people understand now, maybe more so than ever, of a trade-in value of, okay, like I'm going to watch some advertising and that will get me to a lower price. And, that is the decision that consumers are making is how much money do I want to spend and how much is my tolerance to watch ads?
Yeah.
And then on the ad-free front, we do offer, so, the Philo subscription, we bundled in AMC Plus with that. It is the ad-supported version. It's served within our app. But we do offer the ability to upgrade to the ad-free version of AMC Plus. And we also offer Stars and MGM Plus, which are both ad-free. So, we try to give consumers a little bit of the choice where we can.
Gotcha. So I'm gonna stick with you on this one too. So we've been talking about like, you guys and Roku and Amazon have bundles, but who else is doing bundles now? Like, are we seeing the MVPD start doing bundling it with cable, or do you think we will? We also see these sort of, single, like Disney doing all their stuff together. So where else are we going to start seeing bundles coming on?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing it kind of everywhere, I would say. I mean, you asked about cable. I think one of the most aggressive in that arena has been Charter Spectrum, kind of padding their entry level package with, well, pretty much any of the quote unquote plus services that their programmers are offering. So, getting in Disney Plus, getting in ESPN Plus, Paramount Plus, and really looking, I think what we're seeing there in cable is, or traditional cable, I should say, is the programmers over the last several years have really had a shift in both investment and attention away from their traditional linear channels and towards the direct to consumer services they've built. And, with that, the price that cable companies pay in wholesale license fees has not decreased largely. And so, if you're a cable company like Charter or even like Philo, we're looking for ways that we like continue to offer value to the consumer. And part of that is bringing in the, those plus services. So I think we're definitely seeing it on cable. I think we'll continue to see more in the both traditional and virtual side of the MVPD spectrum. But, I think we're seeing it, you brought up Disney. They have a host of services. I think where you own multiple services, it's to your benefit to try to expand your audience there. And I think we'll also start to see it more and more, outside of video, bringing in bundles from the other services that we all use in our lives, whether that be, a video service that's included with your cell phone bill, or, we're seeing it more like Peacock has an Instacart partnership. So I think just thinking about like those other services you use in your life and how do you tie, uh, video to that to expand the audience.
Right. And Anastasia, I mean, you guys are obviously competing against, at some level. Like, are you seeing other than Charter, doing what Adam was talking about, are you seeing the sort of basically broadband providers thinking, we should start doing more streaming stuff? Or are they kind of sticking with TV, or it's just somewhere in between?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, looking across the industry, we're very watchful of all these different trends, and we know a lot of that is happening over here. But I think, as a platform, in terms of where the consumption actually happens, we really feel like we're a really good place to also, discover and access a bundle as well, right? So we offer some bundles on our platform already today. And that's really kind of a value proposition that we're investing in more, right, for the future. How do we create the right type of experience for the user? I mentioned, aggregation and simplicity and ease of use, all those things kind of factor in. But fundamentally, we're in conversations with our partners. We're, thinking about what makes the most sense. We're finding those kind of win-win situations, and how do we best create that for the user. But yes, overall, I think there's a lot of bundles out there. It's a little bit confusing to the user, I think, sometimes. I think, in terms of some of the charter bundles, I may be wrong, but I think you actually have to opt into that. So you may have access to it, but you have to actually activate that benefit. So not all users may be aware they actually have it. But I think, if you want to take a direct action, and you want to do it sort of, while you're streaming, I think, a platform like Roku is a great place to do that.
Got it. Now, speaking of people not being aware of that they have bundles, Brendan, we see a lot of the phone company, a lot of the mobile carriers have all these bundles. Like T-Mobile in particular has, like, you can pretty much subscribe to everything for free, although I think you may need to be a new subscriber or something to do that. As we're starting to see these people coming with 5G, are we going to start seeing more of those sorts of things, put streaming together with content, with content, actually the actual broadband and content together? And then also, are we going to start seeing things like, Adam had mentioned Instacart? Are we going to start to see like Spotify and the Washington Post, or whatever, like sort of people putting together bundles of just media, not just TV?
Yes, I think definitely. And so, we're in talks with the operators, the distributors, pretty much anyone with an eye towards the ecosystem, and bundling is, of course, top of mind for everyone. To a degree, it almost feels like everyone's pointing the finger at one another. It's like, who's on the hook to kind of figure this out and set this up. And I think the huge challenge, and of course, from where I sit, I'm not privy to any of these conversations, but is figuring out, how do we whack up this revenue, and how do we like kind of come together in some way that makes sense. And so I think that's the big challenge to figure out. In terms of going beyond video and into other categories, of course, we're already seeing it. Like Adam mentioned, that Instacart. To even take that a step further, one of my favorite examples is, if you have an Amex Platinum card, you can get Instacart Plus for free through that card. If you have Instacart Plus, you can get Peacock free through Instacart Plus. And so it's almost like a Russian nesting doll of subscriptions. And so I think a challenge with that is that I just heard this yesterday on a call from an operator in the space is, I want to cancel my Peacock. I forget where I am paying for it though, right? Whether it's through their telco, through their Comcast, there's a lot of subscriptions out there across varying ways. I think this idea of like one central hub is resonant with the consumers in the industry. To a degree, it might be a bit utopian in that way, because there's going to have to be a lot of lifting and shifting based on the millions and millions of subscriptions that are out there already today.
Huh. So that's fascinating, and I just learned something about my platinum card with Instacart and Peacock, because I'll hit you. I'll pay you back for that. You also get a free Walmart Plus subscription with the platinum card, which then gives you a free Paramount Plus subscription.
There we go.
So pretty much, you don't have to. If there's one takeaway you guys have, you don't have to pay for anything. Just get an Amex Platinum card, and you're good. You're good. So I want to talk to Adam and Anastasia about who is part of these bundles. So obviously, like if I'm Netflix, everybody's going to want me. But for like Adam, what is your sort of argument for some of these smaller channels and services, why it's a good idea for them to be part of a bigger bundle?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Netflix. I think with one exception, they've kind of, or maybe some smaller exceptions, they've kind of stayed away from the bundling. And I think, Brendan used an example before of like a hypothetical Netflix Spotify bundle. And it's sort of like there are certain brands in the space that have the consumer base that they need, and they are not as reliant on bundling to kind of grow or maintain or kind of mitigate their churn. So I do think that this becomes like more interesting for those smaller and mid-sized players. And I think, with I'll talk a little bit just about our experience at Philo. I've mentioned before that we last year launched a new version of our package that includes AMC Plus. We really looked at like the viewership that was happening on our platform and really came at it from a perspective of like, what can we put in that will increase more value? And we know that we have users that are deep fans of AMC's content. So giving them a deeper library, more access to originals at a great price was something that was a no-brainer for us. We very specifically did not try to go out and do a bundle with a Netflix or a Hulu or something like that, which I think would have been much more complicated for a number of reasons, but also, you know, you look for partnerships that make sense to the consumer and that make sense to the content companies as well. And I think a lot of the smaller and mid-size are kind of looking at like, how can we partner to expand our growth, and how do we, if I think we've seen it with Max lately, right? Like they going from Max to HBO Max, they're kind of conceding a bit that they're not going to be the next Netflix, and they want to be known for what they do. But we are seeing Max lean into bundles. They're bundling with Disney and others, and Max is certainly like a nice size service, but even they are feeling the need to grow, and they're looking at bundling as a means to do that. So, I think there's a tier of players that, they're large enough to go it alone, and then everybody else is sort of looking at what they can do to grow their business.
Gotcha. No, that makes perfect sense. And I have actually used that phrase, Mac, just last week, that Max realized they're not going to be the next Netflix, so they went back.
I maybe borrowed that from you.
It wasn't like a great insight, but okay. But I'll take the credit. I'll take the credit. Anastasia, so talking like, what's your, as Roku, what is your pitch to sort of these smaller services, and even some of like the people who do fast services and fast channels, like these smaller ones, like what's their advantage to sort of being part of the greater Roku ecosystem? I know obviously you can, they're not paying, they're free as the name implies, but what is your overall pitch to them?
I mean, I think, there's certainly kind of where we are today and where we want to be in the future. And in general, just, our position as a platform, I think, we're kind of in a unique position. We can really help to advise our partners and really think about, what is that best approach, right? What is the best fit in terms of a bundle, given that we work with so many partners and can really understand consumption on the platform. But I kind of agree with, a few things everyone has already said here, Adam talking about how there is a place for different types of bundles that includes some of the smaller players. I think Brendan talked a lot about like analytical frameworks. What's the best type of bundle? We have a lot of first party data that we leverage as well. We kind of look at overlap. So yeah, I think all of those things together, our pitch is that, yeah, bundles are going to be important, but we have to do it in kind of a strategic way and in a smart and a thoughtful way. And also just leveraging data. Like ideally, I would want to be in a place where we surface the right bundle to the right user at the right time, right? That, users don't have to make an active choice. They're able to really, stumble upon something that works for them based on their content preferences. So that's kind of the long-term vision. But the pitch is obviously, we're kind of the place where consumption happens, and this is where users want to take a direct action.
Got it. So I want to ask you about advertising too. So say if I'm one of these smaller services and I'm part of the Roku bundle, how does that, on the one hand, I have more subscribers, so it's great. I get, I can run more ads, more people, but how does the data work and all that, or is it sort of on a case by case basis?
Are you talking, Alan, about the premium subscriptions model in general?
Yeah. In other words, if I'm running ads and I have a or even the viewer data, like how does that, how does that work? Like what are the pros and cons of me bundling on that data,
Yeah.
especially ad data? Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're talking about just in general, like what would compel a partner to really distribute their service through a channels model effectively, or an ingest model. Yeah, I mean, I think, certainly there are trade-offs for the partner, right? Like the access direct data, et cetera, but all of that can be worked out. But I would say in terms of the value a partner gets from being in that type of model, really are able to show that they can really kind of drive incremental growth, right? So let's say that they're distributed in the app and then they launch on premium subscriptions. The fact that we can really deeply integrate premium subscriptions through our UI means that we can really help them to really kind of re-accelerate growth in many cases. So I think that's something that partners are really excited about. And look, there's also some players who really actually want to focus on the channels model long term, right? I think they're sort of okay ceding some of the product work and the investment to Roku and to others long term, right? As they think about their future and where they want to invest as a streaming company. But every company has a different strategy. I think everyone's a little bit different in terms of whether they want to be in that model or not. But we think there's really distinct benefits to doing so.
Gotcha. And Adam, what's your pitch for come join Philo. Come join Philo.
Yeah, I mean, I think so as I said earlier, like we've been really focused on entertainment. So, I've in the years that I've been here, I've looked at a great many things, been pitched by many people. And, we've had a number of reasons to say no, either because, we look at our data, as Anastasia was saying, we look at our data very, very closely, and we try to bring in the things that are right for our users and also that protect the value, right? Like a number of times people over the years have said, you guys should get Bravo. And I'm like, yes, I understand Bravo is a great fit with what we do, but also Bravo comes along with NBC and MSNBC and a host of other things. And, all of a sudden I'm not selling you a product that is in the $20 range. It's, maybe in the 40 or 50. And so, yeah, I think for us, like we are really interested in working with brands that kind of like reach that entertainment. I think bundling for us, and as we try to do more things like the AMC Plus partnership, we're looking at how do we bring in things that enhance the value. So things that already kind of fit in with the Philo ecosystem or things that are kind of natural progression. So, AMC Plus did bring us some kind of premium dramas that are less represented on our general channel lineup, but we have seen people have a good interest in them. And it kind of, to Anastasia's point about, growth and viewership, like we've been able to A/B test things on our platform where we've, for a group of users, like we've highlighted content that's kind of deeper in that library. And we do see like an increase in viewership, not only of that content, but of similar type of content. So I think for us, there's a lot that we're doing on our own platform to kind of encourage discoverability and viewership, and bundling within a single ecosystem is a way to help drive that.
Gotcha. So Brendan, one of the things that we hear a lot is, the MVPDs, which, they're they're still the main source of bundles, whether people like that or not, the triple platinum lock-in for 2 years. But there's another theory that says, these guys make most of their money selling broadband. So do you think we're going to start seeing pretty soon them offering like, hey, here's broadband and X number of streaming services, and whether it's like, hey, we may partner with the channel store, or we're just going to do our own sort of thing? Do you think we're going to start seeing that anytime soon, or are they still pretty much locked into that? We're gonna milk this for as long as we can.
I think it will take hold on the broadband side of things as well. I believe Comcast is doing that on like certain qualified plans. I'm not exactly familiar with their SKUs. So yes, I do think we will see it and continue to see it. And it'll continue to take place on the MVPD side. If you recall the carriage dispute with Disney, between Charter and Disney, that kind of led to all of this. You could say it was negotiating posture. We don't know to a degree, but I remember there being quotes of Charter being willing to abandon the pay TV business if they couldn't get that arrangement in a zip code that they were happy with. And so I think kind of everything's on the table. And so, sure, I do think we'll continue to see it with all of these connectivity companies, whether that's broadband or, traditional pay TV.
Gotcha. What are you thinking, Anastasia? Since you guys could be the person that, you guys could be who they're selling. They just get the Roku channel store. Well, I mean, have you heard, mumblings about this, or is it still kind of like maybe?
Honestly, yeah, I mean, I don't think really we're kind of, I don't think we're thinking about that so much, right?
Yeah.
I think, I think we think of them as sort of another endpoint, another place to get subscriptions at the time being. I think we want to be the place where users ultimately sign up for their subscriptions. So I think that's what we're focused on today, is really making sure that our value prop is super strong, right? Why would a user subscribe on Roku versus getting their subscription over here, right, as a kind of a value add product? I think kind of thinking about that mental map, I just think overall, what we're talking about here, to me, it really signals there's probably a lot of user confusion in the market, right? I think we're all fairly sophisticated. We really understand, I think, how to get subscriptions, how to maximize our subscriptions. But if I had to guess, the average user really, really doesn't. And so I think that's what we're kind of building for as a platform, is really making sure that we make it as simple as possible. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, Alan.
No, that
but
does. Yeah, that does. And Adams, now you guys almost in a weird way stand to benefit the most, because it's like, okay, if I still, if Charter is doing away with the cable bundle, hey, and I still want to watch my channels, boom, here we are. But do you think that's going to happen?
Well, I think that we have tried to differentiate, right? Like by staying true to that focus on entertainment. I think, it's interesting, like if I think about like obviously Roku being a very different company than Philo, but like the thing, or one of the things that we have in common is, with both of our products to work, consumers got to bring broadband or some type of internet access, right? So there is no watching Philo without some sort of connection to the internet. And same thing, I mean, if I take my Roku box at home and I turn off my wireless router, well, there's nothing coming through. So, I think it's interesting how we think about that. We have not, to date, although we've had conversations with how do we bundle, in effect, with some of these broadband companies, especially as some of the smaller and mid-size, so not Charter specifically, but some of the smaller and mid-size are exiting video because they're making good margins on their broadband business, and they are not able to anymore on video. And so they are looking at, okay, how do we effectively sell more services on top of broadband without having to take on building those services ourselves? So, it's interesting. It's like we need them for our business to grow, but we're also to date growing without directly partnering with anyone specific.
Right. And I know that NCTC recently, like within the last couple of months, maybe even a little bit longer than that, sort of rolled out some sort of plan to sort of, hey, if you want to do a virtual thing, because you're just tired of having your own box and all that, we can give this to you. And and you're right, there's been a lot of the smaller MVPDs have just been like, this isn't worth it for us anymore to keep updating this and coming up with our interface. So it seemed to offer an opening. We have 3 questions here. We have about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to turn and we can always come back. So, the first person I'm going to do this time, Nora Ryan asks, streaming bundles still do not provide a combined guide as cable does. Is that available or in development, and why not? Anyone want to take that?
I think as a consumer, I think Roku in particular does a very good job with the hubs and things of that nature. I have a few Roku devices, and I typically don't have a problem finding what I need, but that's just me speaking as a consumer and kind of putting my antenna hat to the side. Obviously, it doesn't look like what the TV guide used to be or things of that nature, but I think we're kind of adapting to new methods of discovery.
Yeah, I mean, I think,
checked you.
thank you for that call out, Brendan. We love your research as well. So back at you. Yeah, I mean, I think, we're talking about bundling, but I think we're in general just talking about, just a challenge in the streaming ecosystem is like, how do I find what I watch? How do I sign up for what I want ultimately? Yeah, I mean, we definitely invest in that on our platform, right? Like our search, kind of backbone really powers everything, in terms of, what we service to users from a content discovery perspective. If you're searching for something, we have a deep integration with all our partners to surface the right content to them. And ultimately, when they search, they will then hopefully hopefully find the right sign up options as well. And then hopefully we'll be surfacing, relevant bundles to them in there as well. So it all kind of connects. But I agree. I mean, I think across the industry, this is definitely a pain point. And there's no easy solution today. I think we're all kind of trying to do it in different ways, and really kind of solve some of those pain points as best we can across the industry. But ultimately, I think just selling net new bundle SKUs is not going to solve this challenge.
Gotcha. Adam, do you have?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that at Philo we're very focused on. We and I forget which, I think maybe it was Anastasia who brought up the point that in the way that Charter has approached bundling, because uh, they're not necessarily putting things into their own ecosystem, but they're having people kind of like opt in and authenticate and use those apps. There is like a disconnect of, still, where do I watch things? What do I have access to? And I think we've had the approach that we really, really strongly believe that putting everything into a single ecosystem is the best user experience. Best for search, best for discoverability, and best for like just ease of watching things. I mean, the less or the more you can take away that kind of, I want to watch this, I forget, is that, is it on Philo, is it on Hulu, is it on Netflix? And just kind of put people into the space where they're used to watching, everything's there for them. That is the model that we've been most focused on. And, a big point for us with doing the AMC deal, but also other deals that we're looking at currently, is bringing content into the Philo ecosystem rather than having a bundled SKU of Philo and something else. But yeah, you've got to remember what that other thing is. You've got to go flip between apps, and you've got to remember, okay, who's billing me for that? And so I think it is a consumer pain point, and I think one that a lot of people are cycling on. I think the platforms have a bit of an advantage, as Anastasia was talking about, with things like Roku channel being able to kind of put things into an ecosystem. Universal search is a great driver for that. But, if you're thinking about like standalone bundles, it's harder for those, if I subscribe to the Disney Max bundle, I've still got my Disney Plus app and my Max app, and I'm flipping between the two, and it's not really fully integrated in the way that would be most helpful to me.
That's especially painful for sports as well. Like
Yeah.
going from NFL Christmas to NBA Christmas on TNT, like literally changing the HDMI port to change the channel. Again, as a consumer, it becomes a pain in the neck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll two quick stories to illustrate the problems there too. So when Hulu Live TV launched a few years ago, if you remember, they had this beautiful interface. It was very like elegant. It won all sorts of design awards. It would surface like the one show I thought you wanted to watch and everything. And they did some research, and they found there was a pretty big segment of people who disliked it intensely. They're like, "Where's my grid? I want my grid. Give me my grid back." And so they had to kind of go back to that. And now they're sort of somewhere in between. But a lot of times, the more people like what they had, and they like being able to sort of go like this with with the channel guide and all that, and and it's often different ages and whatnot. But that's part of the problem. The other part is that a lot of the bigger apps, in particular, and you probably know this more than anyone, Anastasia, they do not like people not going in through their app. They want to curate your whole experience there. They want you to go into their app, and they can try and show you other shows that they have to keep you subscribing and all that. So they're resistant too. They want all the data too. How did you click around the thing? Did you see any ads, whatever? So that's another big part of it, that rather than sort of make the experience better for the consumer, they're kind of going like this with their data. So the next question we have here is from an anonymous attendee. So remember, you can ask questions anonymously, people, if you want to jump in here. How does bundling affect niche markets? Is it necessary for them to incorporate, or is bundling an issue that only affects larger networks or platforms? If niche markets need this, how would they go about implementing it into their smaller offerings? So basically, she's asking, if I'm a niche service, how do I not get lost in a bundle, I guess, is the question.
I think it goes back to really kind of picking off those combinations that maybe you wouldn't think of or wouldn't seem logical right off the bat, to hit that pocket of, someone who's interested but not obsessed with Up, Faith and Family, and someone who's interested but not obsessed with Shudder, for instance, right? It's kind of finding that sweet spot of the casual consumer and then getting them in at the right price, which gives them kind of the energy to go activate. Overall, though, I think these specialty services, right? Their potential audience is just lower than that of Netflix, right? Like, or a general entertainment streamer. And so we'll see how far those types of bundles, as we increasingly see them, how far they can scale. However, I think in terms of not getting lost, I think it's just going to be those more like creative partnerships, right? It probably doesn't make as much sense to put together Acorn and BritBox if you're just going to cannibalize super fans of, British programming, for instance. And so I think that the challenge is kind of identifying what are those pockets of consumers where this would kind of satiate their specialty video diet.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Definitely agree with what you said, Brendan. I think as a market, we've actually seen, pretty tremendous growth in those specialty services. So there's definitely an appetite there, right? And so I think it's just putting together those right combinations. And ultimately, if we can get to a place long term where bundles are inherently more dynamic, they're a little bit more algorithmically driven, right? Kind of putting together the right bundle for the right user. I think there's definitely an opportunity there. Now, how big is it? I think that's the question. But I think that there's definitely an opportunity for those services to bundle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think my advice here, if I'm kind of reading between the lines, this sounds like somebody who's thinking through, like, how do I weigh the decisions of what bundles are interesting for me? And my advice here is always, you know, it's very attractive to kind of, or it can be very attractive to try to hitch yourself to the biggest wagon. And I do think that's where you sometimes get lost. Ultimately, like, you do want people watching your content. So if you're a more niche service, I would say look to partner with, as fellow panelists were saying, look to partner with services that will help grow your audience, that may not be the kind of, shoot for the moon, but look at, like, what's popular on your service, what's driving the audience, you know, survey, talk to your audience, find out what else they're watching. There may be things that surprise you, and it may make sense to do a tie up with another niche service where actually there's a great amount of value, and everybody's viewership grows. And it's not sort of like, okay, well, how do I, get myself attached with 100 million Netflix subscribers? But it's sort of, how do I, like, get myself that next 5 to 10 million by looking at a service that maybe has a more similar size to me.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And then the last question, which we sort of answered, but I'll throw it out again, is here we go. We have a new one. Bigger companies don't want to partner with new small niche streamer. Oh, that's not a question. That's just an answer. Anyway, here we go. Oh, here we go. With bundles on premium channels, who owns the data, the platform or the publisher? We sort of, like, maybe we just sort of give a straighter answer. Does it vary from deal to deal, and there's no one answer?
Yeah, I mean, if it's our product, ultimately, right, we own the data, but that is something that we have conversations with each partner. We ensure that they get the data that they need. Ultimately, it's really deal by deal, but ultimately, I think it's more just an indirect path to the data, if that makes sense. But whoever owns the product ultimately controls the data. That's the fundamental answer.
Yeah, I think that answers it. So we still have about 5 minutes left here. Just want to ask you guys, like, what, where do you see this all going? In other words, like, do you think that most people will have some form of bundle, and that we'll start seeing, different variations of it, as opposed to this sort of a la carte monthly thing being the default? Or, and what's sort of the time frame you're seeing on that? We'll start with you, Brendan.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think going forward, we'll continue to see experimentation. As I mentioned earlier, I think that it is this great idea and this great image to have a central hub to manage all your subscriptions. I think today we're certainly not there. I think there are many players in that space endeavoring to be that hub. However, it's quite kind of fragmented right now. And so in order to kind of move from fragmentation to kind of earning share as that central hub, I think something's got to give, and we'll continue to see operators kind of experiment in their pricing and packaging. As Anastasia was saying, fast forward X amount of time, we could be living in a world where there are these dynamic bundles, right? Come to this distributor, pay $40 a month, and you pick your 4 services for the month, and then you get 5 trades throughout the year, right? Like there could be all of these things that you couldn't do when you're tethered to a cable box and so on. And so I think we'll continue to see more and more experimentation as people try to continue to become that central hub and control as much share of wallet as they can.
Okay, Anastasia, since you were tagged on that.
Yeah, sure. I think I already mentioned, kind of what my future vision looks like. Personally, I think for the streaming ecosystem, I think getting to that sort of future state dynamic bundling vision is where I would like to get us, ultimately. But, there's a lot of hurdles and challenges. I'm not naive, right? I think there's product limitations, contractual limitations, the bundles have to make sense from an economics perspective. There's a lot of things that have to get reconciled to get us to an idyllic, utopian vision for the consumer, and, to really address some of these issues and really make it sense, really have it make sense for the business as well on both sides. So I think we're going to take baby steps, incremental steps over time. And I agree, there's going to be a lot of experimentation.
Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo some of what Brendan and Anastasia said, that it's got to make sense for the consumer. And so, ultimately, I think what will drive adoption is, like Anastasia was saying, is there's something that can be more dynamic, more personalized, so that you feel like, okay, this is the right thing for me in this moment. I know personally, as somebody who's been in this industry for a while, I used to subscribe to every service, and then that just got unwieldy. And now I do look more at bundles where I'm like, all right, well, if I'm, got this and this is interesting to me, maybe for the football season. But that, I think it was also Anastasia said, most of us here are very savvy. We spend most of our days thinking a lot about this. And so we're aware of what's out there. But when I talk to my friends outside of the industry, they're like, how do you watch this? Where are you watching this? What's the best place to get this? And so I do think that, like, ultimately, like, a major key to driving more adoption of either just streaming subscriptions generally, or app or bundles, more specifically, will be about that, like, personalization and having some ability to put things together dynamically.
Yeah. So yes, I get texts to, how do I watch whatever? I'm like, I'm not Google. And I think it's the answer, Brendan and Anastasia, you should have both touched on how I think the future is going to play out, is that one, in the ideal world, it's 40, whatever it is, $100 a month, and you get your 4 services, and you can make trades along the way. But I do think, to your point, Anastasia, that the legal departments of all these companies are going to be like, yeah, I don't think so. That's not going to happen. So it's going to take a while to kind of play itself out and figure something. Anyway, we are at time right now. So thank you guys so much. This was great. Really fascinating conversation. Thank you, audience, for your questions, and take it away, Steve.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Alan. Thanks, Anastasia, Adam, Brendan. It was a great conversation, great advice in there, and sort of crystal ball look at the future of bundling too. Much appreciated. Also, excellent questions from the audience. And we just have one more panel left today. Before we get to that, I do want to congratulate, my apologies in advance for how I say your name, but Adeleke Elawale. Congratulations, you correctly identified Coffee is the Color by Roy Ayers. And watch your email in the next week or so. You should get an email explaining how to claim your $50 Amazon gift card. And we will be back for one more panel in half an hour, and that is Going, Gone. Can biddable advertising fix CTV's fill rate slump? So hope to see you there. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Ed. Cheers.